Cameroon, and West Papua. Mark is a committed futurist who is passionate advocate of greater foresight planning in society at large. In the summer of 2020, Mark initiated a campaign to celebrate the historic Jewish community of the English city of Rochester, the city of his birth. Please welcome Mark T. Jones.
Mark will be speaking on Liberate Ourselves from the Stronghold of the Ephemeral. I felt that he challenged the traditional view and concept of ephemeral. Rather, he is the proponent of eternal concept in mind. And this is just only the tiny part of Mark. He always reminds me to recall one of the greatest proverb of Chinese, the Confucius proverb, that shows that when I see or when we see people, we see people's face. But when we live, we touch on people's hearts. When you combine these face and heart together, and there is a synergy and harmony, that is the true beauty of humankind. And that is always found in Mark. Mark, if you can start.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Data and Dr. Bonnier, for reading that profile out. You've been very, very generous in your tribute there. The presentation that I'm giving you, my keynote, I've talked about liberating ourselves. That immediately gives the impression that in some way we are captive, that we are prisoners, that we've been incarcerated or held against our will. And so we have to ask the question, well, what do we need to be liberated from? Well, I say that we are currently, the world, or large swathes of the world, are in the stranglehold or the grip of the ephemeral, of that of no real worth, of the superficial, the chasing of celebrity and of riches and of status. And that blinds us in a way. It does imprison us. It shackles us both mentally and physically from striving for that is far more worthwhile, of something that it lasts not just in our lifetime, but for all time. And that is the spiritual, something that we've heard of throughout the sessions today. And so I want us to try and think about what it is in our life that is becoming the impediment for our engagement with the spiritual. And there are many things, and each of the incarcerations, I suppose, are unique to each of us. We each face our own challenges on our journey of faith and engagement with the spiritual. The Bhagavad Gita has a unique role to play, and it's fascinating that it is not just of relevance to Hindus, it's of relevance to the whole of mankind. It's a book which is for the eternal. It's a book for everyone, in the same way that that great writer of the English language, William Shakespeare, he writes about eternal and universal themes which are relevant to all. So the Bhagavad Gita has a remarkable status and something that we must cherish and respect. When we delve into the Bhagavad Gita and we are on a journey with this book, we have to revisit it more than once. It's not a question of reading it cover to cover and saying, well, I've read the Bhagavad Gita. One returns to it or section of it at different times, in different moods, in different aspects of our life. And interestingly, we start to discover that there are elements to it which help give us a degree of balance. We heard from Professor Silva this morning that there are elements of the Bhagavad Gita, the slokas that we can return to at different times, depending on the situation that we are in. It is a book which is not about what's fashionable now and what will be out of fashion in a few weeks or next year. It's about the eternal. It's about something which has intrinsic value for the existence of mankind and beyond. It has a cosmic relevance. an eternal, special, supreme, and sublime meaning that if we can dip into, and it is often a question of us dipping into it. It's, sometimes we have to absorb it slowly. It's very difficult for us. And as I say, we have to try and attune ourselves, like tuning in a radio or calibrating something so it is aligned. And that might mean we have to change our way of approaching it. We may need to find a quiet place, a garden, a rooftop, somewhere where we can sit and get into the right frame of mind to engage with this remarkable work. And it is truly remarkable. And the more you delve, the more you find. It is like that. We often find the most profound in the most simple, the seemingly simple, the seemingly overlooked. We're surrounded by the wonders of creation, and thereby we should wonder, how did these come about? How did we come about? How do we cherish that is creation? And the Bhagavad Gita gives us some serious pointers there about how our conduct should be. And we have a responsibility, we have a duty, our dharma, our duty is with regard to our conduct, towards ourselves, towards our others, and of course to the planet itself. And sadly, we look at the world today and it's quite clear we've neglected our duty with regard to our guardianship of the natural world. We're in such a unique place as human beings, and yet we're often neglectful. And we're not just neglectful, we're often very harmful of the world around us, of the animals around us, the flora and fauna, and we're neglectful of our fellow human beings. The Bhagavad Gita provides us equipoise. Equipoise, we could describe it as being in balance, sometimes an extraordinary balance. It's that inner balance, not a tightrope walker's balance. And it does this in a number of ways. One, it enables us to have a better purpose in life, the appreciation of what life is really about. Some people seem to think life is all about acquiring wealth, monetary wealth, and possessions. Others chase after status. They're wanting status in their community, in their profession, in their life in general. And yet the Bhagavad Gita does not say that is what life is about. There is something far more intrinsic about what life is, if we're to attain the eternal and the spiritual. And of course, we've been told today about the importance of self-knowledge, understanding our strengths, our weaknesses, our foibles, listening to our bodies, listening to that inner spirit that drives us, that gives us purpose, that gives us satisfaction as a sentient human being. Certainly the Bhagavad Gita challenges us, and it challenges us to see things differently, to look at things differently, and thereby, ergo, to act differently. Our conduct should be changed as a result of imbibing the ideals and the tenets and the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, and thereby we get that little bit closer to the eternal. We're aligning ourselves with that really is of value for all time. The route to enlightenment, which is how we reach, in many ways, the best route to the eternal, comes in many different ways. We certainly need to see and act differently. We need to have action without attachment. That's very, very difficult. So often we act with a purpose, with a motivation, sometimes an ulterior motive. We're doing something for really our benefit. And so it's hard to take that hidden agenda, or sometimes it's an overt agenda, out of it and act without the desire to accrue wealth, status, praise, whatever that may be. I say one of the biggest challenges for all of us in our daily life now, wherever we are in the world, is to cleanse ourselves of that which distracts us, that which corrupts us, that which blinds us. I talk about blindness because sometimes we have so much clutter in our lives, so many things going on in our private and our personal and our family lives and our communal lives, that the eternal becomes obscured. It's, spiritual things are pushed to one side. They're not central to our being. And that blinds us. It causes us to become myopic. We only see a very narrow focus. We don't see the full picture, and we certainly don't see the spiritual aspect to our lives. We become corrupted ethically quite often by some of the things that might fast track us to the status we want in earthly life. We want earthly status, earthly wealth. We want the symbols of earthly success, in inverted commas, and thereby people become corrupted in order to fast track themselves to get more of the same. And we certainly become distracted from that deserves our attention. We know from the Bhagavad Gita that Arjuna faces a monumental struggle and a dilemma in his life, in his earthly existence. And yet the Bhagavad Gita is really telling us about ourselves, that in our lives we face a struggle, we face dilemmas, and how are we going to wrestle and deal with those in a spiritual way? Each of us has inner battles with ethics, with morality, with spirituality. And sadly, in the world today, many people are slaves to or prisoners to the symbols of worldly success, whether they be money, whether they be status, whether they be celebrity. There are many people, many millions of people, that actually think these things are profoundly valuable. You can tweet a spiritual message on Twitter and one or two people might like it, retweet it. You can tweet something about a celebrity and suddenly thousands, potentially millions are interested. What does that say about us and our world? We live in an age of masks. We're all being told we have to wear masks. But even before COVID, there were elements to us which were deeply unpleasant. One day we were fearful, another day we were worried and preoccupied. We were jealous, we were filled with anxiety, and often we were angry about family, angry about community, angry about friends, or about the lot in life for us. How often do these apply to us? How do we learn to accept that there's another way, a spiritual way, a way of acceptance, a way of forgiveness, a way of inner peace, a way of outer peace, a way of sharing rather than wanting to covet to yourself? Of course, that journey is about Atman, ultimately, because Atman is the Sanskrit for self. And we're talking about self. We're talking about how we are, what we can become. And we can change. We can liberate ourselves from those things that we formerly thought were meaningful and discover and seek that which has a deeper, more eternal meaning. And it's interesting that another interpretation of Atman is breath. We need breath to exist. We need to be able to breathe. And if we are incarcerated, if we're in a stranglehold, we are not fully breathing. We're not breathing that breath of spiritual enlightenment, of acceptance, and of understanding that there is something far more meaningful. The quest for the non-material self is surely a priority. We need to liberate ourselves from transitory gratification. So we buy a new car, we think it looks good, we think everyone will be impressed. A week, a few months later, people are no longer impressed. We're no longer impressed. We need to liberate ourselves from the tyranny of material things, the vanities of things, and of social standing, and constantly chasing for status and titles and deference. We need to grant ourselves manumission. Manumission was a document given in ancient times to slaves that were freed. And it was a document of freedom that basically say, I'm a free slave. I have my freedom. We can grant ourselves manumission. We don't have to be slaves of consumerism. We do not need to be slaves of social climbing and status. We don't need to be conceited and boastful and proud. We can liberate ourselves from all of those things. Of course, when we talk about self, it's not purely about self for ourselves, it's ourselves in our community, in our world, as chess pieces on the board of life. What role do we play? What do we do? How do we affect positive change, enlightenment, and good for the betterment of others, for the betterment of the human spirit? Sadly, we're often the victims of passive cowardice. We see situations that we could address, we choose not to. But why do we choose not to? We're fearful of what others will say. We're fearful of what people will think our motive is. We're fearful of judgment. We're fearful that we're being unorthodox and different to others. As I say, many situations challenge us. They test us. Often we find ourselves in a system, a situation of choice and moral dilemmas. This photograph is very, I say, dear to me in one sense. It haunts me. I was on a visit to Mumbai about 5 years ago now, going to give a speech, and the car I was in stopped for a few seconds because of traffic. My window was open. I held out my camera to take some photographs along the way, and here was one of the photographs I took. That photograph has stayed with me ever since. It's a daily reminder of those who are less fortunate, that we should be reaching out and have a duty, our dharma, to do something about, to make the world more just, more caring, less conceited, less status driven. And that is part of the eternal quest. That doesn't start today. It starts every day with every new day. So that photograph, it haunts me and it reminds me that I need to be a better person. So what is Dharma? In the last few seconds, we need to think about our duty and where our duty lies. You can read those for yourselves, but there's some very important duties there that we need to hang on to think about, to reflect about. The Bhagavad Gita and Hinduism is remarkably generous in its interpretation of duty. And we've heard this morning from one of our Swamis that spoke about the duty towards other faiths, for instance. And that's remarkably generous and public-spirited. And it is again a mark of the divine, of the eternal. We have a duty to ourselves, physically, a duty mentally, and most importantly, spiritually. In society now, we often talk about the physical, sometimes we talk about the mental, but we very, very rarely talk about the spiritual. In fact, it's largely neglected, and yet it should be integral to everything we do. We need to liberate ourselves from the stranglehold of the ephemeral, because if we don't, we suffer. The world suffers, our community suffers, and yet we should be radiating an inner beauty which is sublime. I thank you for your interest. You're welcome to get in touch with me. But the most important message of all that I ask of you is that you look at yourself and say, what can I do to liberate myself? There's so much ephemera around us, so much clutter, so much that distracts us from the spiritual. Maybe it's time, especially in these lockdowns that we're all experiencing, to actually unburden, to liberate, and take a spiritual path to embrace the eternal and to seek the eternal. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.